God, I've lost her name. Oh, Jan Logie, sorry. Sorry, Jan, I had a blank.
It's a long way away. I rise to take the call on this, the Watertight Homes Resolution Services Amendment Bill, which the Green Party is, of course, supporting. We supported the original legislation in 2006, and then we supported the next round of amendments in 2010. So, of course, we're going to be supporting this third round of amendments in 2015 to fix up a problem that was initiated by I believe, National Party government in 1994. And while we don't believe that any of the actual legislation from 2006 onwards have actually done justice to the problem or taken responsibility for the fault, anything to make things better for these families is worth supporting, which is why we have continued to stand in this House and support the bills that are at best in some ways a token effort. So this latest amendment bill is at the heart of it, is going to provide the ability for 70 claimants to be able to receive support through this package, providing still that they can come up with the 50% of the costs of the rebuild of their houses. It is really, as has been stated by other speakers earlier, a very small and technical bill. There were only 3 submissions to the Select Committee on this, though there were amendments, and it has been great to hear from those members who were on the committee about how constructive the process was, and to see Parliament working effectively to iron out some of the amendments needed. I would note too that this bill has in part been prompted by a court case that happened last year where the Osbornes won in the Supreme Court against the Auckland Council, and it is very nice to have the opportunity in this House where a court has found that there was an injustice or a lack of clarity, and that the House would come back and clarify that in accordance with what the court found, as opposed to the family carers legislation that we had under urgency at the last term's budget, where this House or this government chose to override the findings of the court, and as we are now currently going through Select Committee and Social Services, where the government is again trying to cover its butt, basically, through legislation overriding the finding of the court, where this government had not taken responsibility for its misinterpretation of the policy. It is a rare moment that I am going to revel in, that we have actually the government is taking a moment to accord the legislation properly with the interpretation of the courts and the needs of the community. But at the core of this bill is, I think, in the 70 claimants being able to receive support, relates to the provision that will expand the definition of qualifying claimant to include those who, prior to the cut-off date of July next year, were engaged or would be engaged actively in working towards meeting the eligibility criteria. And that is clearly an important thing to do. And I do think it is worth restating in the House some of the things that people need to do to meet that criteria, so that we acknowledge that it's not an easy thing. So that people need to obtain an assessor's report, arrange funding, and that is that 50% of the rebuild costs, and sign homeowners agreement, commission a repair plan, obtain a building consent, obtain quotes, and all of this needs to be in place before that payment plan can be signed off. This is not an easy thing to do. And a friend of mine has been in that invidious situation of having bought a leaky home, and just from place of significant distance, seeing the massive stress on her and her family, where their savings all of their life had gone towards buying this house that they now found they could no longer live in, and that was actually a physical threat of collapsing on top of them and their children, and that they ended up having to move towns to find new jobs, to be able to have to start renting while still paying off this house, and the hope of repairing it, the extraordinary stress of that, and the injustice of it. Even the fact that they have to come up with 50% of the repair costs when it was not their fault, where they'd been told that this house was safe. It does seem to me really unjust, but that is the best that this house could come up with at previous times and was agreed to, and as we've said, of course, is better than nothing. That this, and the point has been made earlier, but I am going to reinforce it, that this leaky home crisis is a salutary lesson on the importance of regulation and the dangers of leaving our critical infrastructure, which is our houses, up to the market. And I do note too that in Auckland at the moment, the building consent process, 40% of the houses being built now are failing those building consents. We have an ongoing process, and part of the problem that caused the leaky homes was the loss of the apprenticeship schemes and the loss of the skills in our building industry. And that was part of the problem, and we have not fixed that problem. And we are seeing that right now in Auckland, and the 40% of houses that are not able to meet the required level of quality to get their building consent. This is an ongoing problem that this House desperately needs to put our attention to, not on a patch-up basis, not on a piecemeal basis, but from a very considered place of considering our housing as core infrastructure that affects the health of our community, that affects the basic economic flow of our communities and the well-being of all of us. It is essential that we take this seriously. The estimated cost of this leaky home crisis is the consensus that was agreed on it, even though there were differing views, was $11.3 billion. 42,000 affected houses from leaving things to the market. This is the cost. And only a tiny percentage, 10 to 25% of that cost is being borne by the people who caused the problem, by government. And other outside estimates have actually estimated that the cost of the leaky building crisis is $23 billion and 89,000 houses affected. This is not a minor issue. While the bill that is in front of us is a small technical bill to support 70 families before the expiry date hits next year, the underlying issues and the cost to our economy and our families are ongoing. And we need a much more considered response, and particularly one focused on prevention in the future, which I remain unconvinced we have those measures in place at the moment. But the Green Party will support this bill and give our best to those 70 families and we hope that you can come up with that 50% of the costs of the rebuild of your house. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.